Most of the authority figures at schools I attended could be classed as neurotic at the best of times, but there's nothing like reminiscing over events to reflect on the totally well-balanced individual one has turned into. And with Halloween only 5 months away, let's talk about candy. The redistribution of candy for the glory of the 4th grade class comrade. When I was in grade 4, I had a teacher that had a modus operandi that made me very uncomfortable. She required students to write about their lives and weekend activities in a journal, and she'd post people's entries on a whiteboard and go over how bad their grammar and spelling was as her way of teaching English. Since this could include people's personal family problems, I viewed it as a violation of privacy, so I just made up fake stories that had nothing to do with my life. We had a Halloween celebration where we were all supposed to bring some candy, and we were going to share the candy, and everyone was going to get candy for their bags. One of the students arrived late and didn't bring any candy, so she said that since he didn't bring any, we all needed to give some from our bags so he could have some candy. She then went row by row through the class and took a handful of candy out of each bag so that this one student could have some. However, the bags we had weren't very large. One handful from the teacher was about a quarter of a bag's contents, and there were somewhere around 25 students, so this one student who brought nothing ended up having this massive pile of candy on his desk, with his bag overflowing with contents and spilling onto his desk because he had so much candy. Some parts of teamwork training are about how if one person fails, everyone fails, but that's not what seemed to be communicated from this. Was it supposed to teach compassion and sharing? If so, it seemed like a failure, as most students seemed unhappy. If it was a single piece of candy from each bag, it would have still filled his. Was it supposed to make him feel guilty for not bringing candy and for mooching off other students? Maybe, but he seemed happy enough at having an enormous mountain of sweets on his desk. I never really understood the teacher's line of reasoning on how this taught a lesson or was an effective means of discipline. Looking back on the event in reflection, the more important issue I think is that I had no desire to ever ask her what her reasoning was. Throughout other events I had witnessed from the school year, the most notable being the journals I mentioned a minute ago, by the time this event happened, she seemed unapproachable to me, so I was concerned if I asked for help I'd just be yelled at. I didn't ask her for assistance with things, and had no need to, because I sat next to a girl who was quite happy to help me if I actually needed it. If I were to do some mental gymnastics, I'm sure I could concoct some reason about how it taught a valuable lesson in self-reliance or some such, but regardless of whether there was a point, rationalized or not, it was incomprehensible to me, and asking for that insight also seemed off-limits. Maybe it was supposed to be a negative representation of the redistribution of wealth, but since that subject was never discussed, I feel that's overly generous, and it seemed to me she just had anger issues. Throughout my K through 10 years, I never took a single economics or civics class. I would have, but none were on offer. I learned more from a Rocko's Modern Life episode about comics than my K through 10 educational career. Supply and demand, Filbert. The best I can remember was a geography project in grade 10, where we were given a black and white map of an African nation and supposed to spend little building things on upgrades for the country. While I was happy about this project and found it more interesting than the normal curriculum, as the geography class was mostly about where biblical events were and discussed almost nothing else, my enjoyment of this fresh material died off quickly. Once my group was done, I went to help another with theirs and noticed they had built a farm meant to contain lots of cows, about 300 miles off the coast in the Atlantic Ocean. I advised against this, they ignored me, and then they earned an A on the project, and full credit, as the teacher phrased it. The participants in this were 15 to 16 years old, and I would have figured by then one should understand cow farm in the Atlantic Ocean was a bad idea, but apparently it merited an A. Frequently I was told of the wonders of American education and how amazing the school system is, and whenever I challenged what I saw as redundancy, overly burdensome bureaucracy, or bad investments of time and resources, I was told these inefficiencies were further evidence of the superiority of American schools because it taught people to get through those problems, in addition to valuable life skills. However, to anyone who looks at the results, this is clearly not the case. The lack of having proper financial knowledge on how to spend responsibly or calculate one's mortgage, or basic understanding of how things are produced and moved from one location to another, has disastrous consequences. See housing crisis. When the Iraq War was a new thing, the teachers at my school said we should be in favor of the invasion because George W. Bush, the president at the time, prayed for guidance, and this was evidence of God's divine blessing of the war, because a Christian running for office, openly declaring their belief in God, was political suicide in a secularist country like America. Bush winning an election in the first place was evidence of divine blessing and proof his political agenda was the will of God, as my history and science teachers put it. I had concerns, but I went over that in a previous video. When debating or discussing any particularly controversial topic, the concept of logistical realism is often outside of people's thought process. I would figure that if a high school student tries to build a farm in the middle of the Atlantic, that might merit docking a few points off the project, at least recommend an oil rig or something. I've previously made an education reform video on the subject of teaching math and finance, but my point is, it seems the average American is illiterate to most of the important parts of finance and economics, and it routinely causes problems, since one with such a handicap will also be taught their opinion on any given topic is extremely important, because democracy is the best form of government, voters are by definition rational, and their opinions are by default valuable. Building a farm in the Atlantic Ocean isn't an equally valid idea as building one on fertile land, though people are taught that it should be treated as such, with it awarding an A. We never discussed the redistribution of wealth in grade 4. What was I supposed to interpret the redistribution of candy as? If we did the redistribution of candy, and then used that as a basis to discuss social programs and whether it's right or wrong to have someone pay taxes to support certain things, that might have made for an interesting discussion. More so if we add in whether or not the kid was unfortunate to not have brought any candy, and whether he did or didn't deserve it, since this particular individual was thrilled to have much more candy than other students. This could have been an excellent basis for a discussion on taxation, like challenging the class to come up with something more fair than what happened, like, say, advising a count of the students and each giving one piece, rather than a quarter of their bag, since this would have balanced out the numbers better, or whether the concept was right or wrong, etc., but that discussion just didn't happen. It's a shame the opportunity went to waste. I suppose my overall point is I feel at least basic finance, economics, and logistics should be part of primary education, and teaching people that they're entitled to their opinion, both being valued and heavily utilized on topics they're ignorant of, is destructive. They need at least enough of an understanding to recognize their own ignorance before being thrown into adulthood, where any mistakes on that point can have severe consequences on both a personal and national scale. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Later, YouTube.